moving into a calibration demonstration here at 2:30, and then following this presentation, we'll have a break and be back for then a few more for the remainder of the day. So I want to introduce our next presenters, and I didn't realize, Nick, that we had you back to back, but Nick Sturniolo and
I'm just moral support.
Yep, and Matt Litzinger, who is a regional sales manager. So welcome, Nick, again, and Matt. I'm assuming you're on here.
I am.
There you are.
Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
So, thanks everyone. I'm Matt Litzinger, regional sales manager here. I've been here for about 8 years.
Matt, you got a little quiet on us.
Yeah, you're a little muted. You're loud.
Here, let me try. How's that? Is that any better?
That's better.
Great.
Okay. And so, I have, on the maintenance side, there was a long-winded, explanation there in depth. But on the calibration side, there's a lot of similarities. But what I want to say here is, I'm going to go through a 50-page PowerPoint with you guys, if that's okay, if we have time. But no, I'm just joking. I'm not doing that to you. I want to show my screen here, hopefully. There. So what I have is one slide, and I have Nick Sturniolo, who's going to assist me on any questions that I may not know. You've already been introduced to him, so we'll just go ahead and jump right into the first slide and only slide that I will show. But the agenda that I'm going to demonstrate on the calibration specific functionality is dive right into the work, right? Kind of show you what that looks like. You've seen a little bit about that on the maintenance side. That's okay. These things are intended to be similar in nature. That's just the nature of it. There is differences between the two departments, if you will, but ultimately we'll drive into the events, kind of what drives that scheduled work. Of course, you can have on-demand calibration as well. You can even have event-based on-demand work still, as you can in R3. So there is capability there. From there, we're going to drive right into the measurement data. Talk about that in some depth, hopefully show you some things there. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions in that particular area. I'm fully expecting it. And then describe the standards. We talked about this early on in previous presentations where we have an asset back standard versus a expiration standard, and just kind of quickly share with you what that looks like. And then ultimately we'll finish off with just a short area within the asset itself of an equipment measurement options menu. So with that being said, let's just jump right into the application. And hopefully you saw the screen change, yeah? Hello?
Yep, we're on the demonstration.
You're on, okay, just making sure because I had to select something else there. So I want to log in.
Matt, we're not seeing RAM.
Yeah, Matt, we still see your screen.
Oh, my apologies here. Hold on. Here. Share the screen. Share. How about now?
That's good.
Okay, sorry. I think I got it now. All right, so logging in. Like I said in the agenda, we're going to dive right into the calibration work. Much was already explained about the user interface and all that, so we're not going to do that to you. I have a work backlog query that will go to, drive to, and I'm going to select a specific work record. It's already existing. It's already created. I'm not going through the steps to create that. You kind of already witnessed that on the maintenance side. It's not as important, I think, to show again on the calibration side. So let's just take a quick peek at the calibration work record. And so this is what it looks like, right? You have your header level information as you would in R3. The tabs, again, are purposed here on the form now than you would in R3. Before, you'd have to go into the view menu to get to those. Now it's kind of in your face with these tabs that you can have access to more, I should say, quicker. So on the results tab, we talked about as left, as found in R3 quite a bit. It's still there, and that will still have the criteria come over from the measurement data. If you are using measurement data, I should say, not everybody is. Some folks have that third-party vendor that provides calibration certificates, which again, we still have the embedded document field as well. So a lot of that functionality is still there. Moving on to, I guess we'll just move down below just to kind of share the full form in its entirety out of the box. We did add and this is specific to the out-of-the-box template. Before it was 2 reviews, but now we've added this 3rd review that if you needed that particular workflow, we could handle that. So you can have up to 3 reviews out of the box. Moving to the planning tab, I want to share a little bit about a couple things. One is that grace periods still exist here on the calibration work, and it behaves similar to the maintenance side as well. So that still exists on the calibration. You can do your dailies if you have any daily calibrations that you want to do. That functionality is here as well, so that slider exists. Who it's assigned to, all that is here. SOP URL link that could drive right to an SOP if you so desire to do that. Description of the work when you want to see what this calibration is for. If there's any description there, you can view that. And just a summary. Now, I want to talk about the form structure of this. On the calibration work record specifically, and throughout other records as well, is the organization of it all. So there's a line here that separates what information is coming next. And I think that's a testament to the baseline configuration team to say, okay, how are we going to organize all this information? And I think they did a great job at kind of separating information in a logical manner that makes sense, it's usable, and it really defends the part where you're not putting any garbage data in, and so you're not going to get any garbage data out. And so with that, the next area that I want to jump right into is the event. So we showed this on the maintenance a little bit, but the maintenance differs than the calibration side, and here's where the most, at least. So we have, your summary, you saw that before, but now on the calibration events, we have measurement data. And so the point here I want to make is I only have one listed, one being a template that has a classification. So first off, you have to understand what these classes are doing. The classes themselves define the types of standards that could be matched with this class. So when this class equals the same class of your standard, it makes it easier to select those standards. And so when you have several classes here, so this instrument on this event, I should say, the unit under test, whenever it comes time to do that calibration, you may have like a multimeter, for example. It has many different functions, and so it has many classes to it. With that, you could have, voltage, amperage, ohms, resistance, all those different functions as classes, and you can have multiple measurement data sheets assigned to those for when you do the calibration, those carry over to the calibration work, right? However, I only have one here listed.
Also, I just want to add, the measurement class ID is defined by you. So if you want to get more granular than weight, you want to get to specific grams, you can. If you want it to be more general, that's up to you to determine as well.
Yep, thanks, Nick. And also, you wanted to add more about the required to complete. I know you talked about on the maintenance side, but
right.
This is big, and it wasn't in R3. So go ahead, Nick.
So it does two things. It allows us to see on the work record directly, are my templates complete? It also enforces the completion of the template. So right now, this is slid to turn off. If you go back to your work order, Matt, that's going to indicate that the field and results, it's in the results tab.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah. Required templates to complete NA. So if there are no templates or no templates are indicated to be completed or required to be completed, that defaults to NA. If we do have a required template, there's no information, that it's an empty field. And that empty field is to prevent the transition forward to the review stage. Once your templates are completed, the field gets populated with a yes. So again, this is what we were talking about with a smart field. Depending on certain conditions and criteria, this field will show different values. And it's one way we're enforcing templates marked required to be completed.
Yep, very good. And so, at a quick glance, you could still have your work plans on your calibration. Any planned labor, of course, can be there, and any attachments that you put onto your event can also carry over to your work. Okay, so let's exit out of here. The next area is what I want to talk about are the measurement data templates, well, the measurement data sheets, I should call them. So there's the template concept, and then there's the measurement data sheet. So the template that you develop on your own on the fly and create those with its own workflow will become measurement data sheets for when it comes time to do the work. Right now I have one here listed on the work record, but rest assured, in what R3 can only do is have one measurement data template assigned to a work record at a time. But in R4, you will be able to add multiple measurement data sheets per work record, okay? So I'm gonna dive into this. I'm gonna double click here. And you'll notice some areas where it's loading those screens. Just so you know, this is, it's not even released yet. So that performance situation there, that'll get improved and better over time, and surely before release, those will be less and less. But that wasn't too bad, actually. That was pretty good. So on the measurement data sheet here, you'll notice at the top right, I just want to point this out quickly, is the slider says is template. This is just to tell the user that this is not the template. This is the actual measurement data sheet that you're going to capture measurement data on. This is where your cal technicians will enter values as found and as left here as we go down the list. But before we do that, as a summary of the measurement data sheet here, kind of what is the associated record involved, the class and all that information is listed here. I also want to point out the standards used, and feedback that we've gotten over the years is our users want to have the ability to define one standard for a certain quantity of set points, for example. Well, you can do that with the idea of having multiple data sheets per work record. So you can reference the standard on the measurement data sheet that you're working in. And all those standards that you have on multiple data sheets will roll up to the work record. Okay?
So just to add on to that, Matt, you can continue. But so the reason why you might want to have multiple measurement data sheets is you have multiple measurement classes, right? So you have different measurement classes that requires its own empty sheet. Well, that means I'm using a different standard per sheet, and I want to be able to see which sheet used which standard. And then on the work record overall, it shows everything that was used overall in this calibration.
Yep, good point. Good point. And you'll see that here in a minute. With the next topic I want to talk about is Randy touched upon it about having different test types when it comes to measurement data. And so what we have developed so far is a linearity test, a repeatability test, and then an eccentricity test. And so with each of these tests, and this is a perfect example of where one might use all three of these, but you could certainly use one of these or multiple one of these and any combination thereof, just depending on your unit under test requirements. But the balance here in this case has all three. So a linearity test, it may test from 4,000 to 15,000 grams that you're putting a weight on that balance, right? As you enter data into this, and as you'll see, I'm entering the as found as I'm finding it. And so it evaluates that entry, it looks at the deviation and calculates that for you. Just as an example of something that's not within your calibration tolerances, just to show you just a little bit down here. Very similar to R3 when it comes to those bands that you can measure against, like the calibration tolerance, the adjustment tolerance, and the process tolerance, given each set point, has those settings for you available in R4. But going back up here, so I say I want to take the measurement of 8,005 grams. Well, that value interprets into a deviation that's gone beyond my allowable calibration tolerance. And in fact, it highlights that area for me upon that calculation, and also flags in the left side here of what was found so far. And so these sliders will give you a good quick indication of what's going on. I also do want to point out on the calibration tolerance tab is what we're using. It's highlighting that as a little yellow dot. I should say orange, yellowish orange. Anyways, that value, that indication is telling you that there's something within that calibration tolerance as found. And kind of neat, I think, to the user interface is the as found comes prior to the calibration tolerance. And then you'll notice on the as left side, it comes on the right side of it. So it's just kind of neat design of it. Let me move forward and just enter, finish, or finalize these values here.
Can you also modify the value of one of the standards, like 4,000?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. I'll show you. We'll just do that. Something crazy.
Yeah. So most of the time, people aren't using inappropriate standards. The most use I've seen, and this is also functionality in R3, the main use is if I accidentally click a key, maybe I had a greasy lunch and I pressed the key I didn't mean to, it'll flag your standard value saying it's outside of what you set up your standard calculation method to be. So that way you get kind of a reference there, because that might be skewing whether or not that instrument point is within tolerance or not.
Yep, good point. And you set that standard criteria at the top here where it says standard calculation method. You could do units as set point. There's other options that are available as well, but I have it set to just plus or minus 1. So this value, as the weight you're putting on the balance, can't be 1 gram beyond or less than the actual weight that it says. But so there is still the function to take your as found and put it to your as left, which I'm going to do right now. And it simply takes exactly what I just said. It shifts it over into the, as found area or as left area. And as I mentioned, there's another indication here on the right side of that calibration tolerance tab stating your as left is out of tolerance. And lo and behold, all the flags are moved to a red indication of a failed indication, which is exactly the case because that's the criteria that I entered. And that's an example of a linearity test. And you may have, again, these are in grams, okay? You may have another linearity test for, temperature for that matter. And so you could have multiple tests in a single measurement data sheet, or you could have multiple measurement data sheets with a single test for those difference in units that you're trying to capture. Repeatability, something we did have in R3, but I think from a user perspective, it's this test is a testament to R4 is to say you want to take the same measurement multiple times. So we're doing a average of all those points, which RAM can or R4 can do. Taking a couple calculations here, as you can see on my as found side, and I've already pre-entered some of this data. Just to save time on the demonstration. But, I'm measuring 500 grams, 6 times, and it's taken the average of those as well as, found standard deviation, found coefficient of variation, and eventually it'll say the found corrected average if I move this over.
Also, so if you scroll up, Matt,
Yeah.
rather than the individual point indicating whether this test passes or fails, if you scroll up, you can use the test pass factor to indicate whether this test passes or fails. So based off the found percent error, you can indicate this fails, not off of an individual reading, but the overall.
Good point. So that's kind of repeatability, again, taking the same measurement multiple times. And And creating these as well is fairly simple. I mean, you can see here there's an add similar button, so you can take the same point over and over again, and just add the same point over and over again, however many times you want to take that measurement. Kind of moving down is the last test that I want to talk about is eccentricity, which is to say on a particular balance, you may have a rectangular one, you may have a triangular one, a circular one. There's many different shapes, but in my case, I'm using a rectangular one. And I just Googled a picture and it gave me some positions. And so I put this, and you can embed this image right onto the test itself. And it helps with getting your positions of where you're taking them. So, measurement number 2 is relative to position 2 on my diagram. So it's very helpful in referencing what point of the balance are you actually taking that test.
One thing I also want to point out is the name of each test. We right now have them named linearity, repeatability, and eccentricity. Whenever you actually use these, you would probably want to update the name to reflect more of what you're testing. So for the first one, it might be 4 to 15 kilogram, this specific model of balance test, or what specifically this test is meant to do. But what we're trying to do with the name is, this is linearity, this is what a linearity test would look like. So you would set up what type of test out of the 3 you're performing and then name that individual test as well.
Yep, good point. And much the same with R3's measurement data, those configuration options per test type, you can find this little wrench here and you can dive into all those options that you're used to having. They're still there, but as a user interface, they're now kind of in an area where the wrench is. So again. Okay. All right. So now, I'm sure there's a lot of questions here, but we'll kind of save those a little bit later. I want to dive into the standards side next. And the standards, I'm going to close out of this. I'm not saving any of those changes. We'll let them be. So the standards area, as I mentioned, you can roll those up from the measurement data sheets, but you can also still apply them onto the work record itself. If you so desire to do that, you would just simply insert those, and you then have your reverse traceability of your standards. So kind of going into this particular standard record, I just double click there and I'm going to navigate to it. So this is what the standard record looks like. It's not the asset record. Okay, this is the standard record. It's a different record type, a different entity. And we're saying this particular standard is an asset-backed standard. And it's asset-backed because it tells us what asset belongs to this standard. Now, if you think about this for a second, is we now have the capability to swap out standards, I should say assets, to become that standard in the future. So you may have that asset retire or it's not in compliance anymore or doesn't meet calibration tolerance anymore and it can't. So you get a new one and you can effectively plug it back into this standard record. And then what you have ultimately is the ability to perhaps even do a field audit history of that particular field. So you can see over time what equipment, what assets swapped in and out of this particular standard over time.
Right. So most of the time, Matt, standard would be an attribute of the asset, depending on the processes. If it's a new standard, I would recommend making it a new equipment. A couple things that I do want to point out that's very different with the standard from R3 is first we see the assignable slider in the top right-hand corner. That's similar to the assignable checkbox in R3. The main difference, though, is in the new or edit stage, I can manually indicate if that is on or off. And so what that means is once the expiration date gets passed or work is performed against it that fails, it'll turn that off. So there's no more needing of creating a historic calibration work and then closing that out to make a standard assignable. You can designate it as assignable in the beginning. And so that brings me to the next point is Matt mentioned this is an asset-backed standard. So what happens whenever we go through our next interval of calibration being performed? Well, in the body, we have the event being referenced, the weight calibration. Every single time work is performed against that event, it populates with a new pass, fail, and expiration date of what represents on the work that was being performed. So it updated it to its next due date. So here in this example, expiration date, think of it as synonymous with the due date. So expiration date, due date, interchangeable. Last action date, that would be on the work record when we said it actually ended, and pass, fail, just if it passed or failed. So every time work is being performed, it updates this standard record. And if it ever has failing, or if it ever becomes past due, that assignable slides off.
Good point. We talked about this, Nick, before today, and there was we wanted to make a point of right now in R3, there's three criteria that you need to have in order to make a standard be a standard, or I should say an asset become a standard, an equipment record specifically. And you had to put in a work record just because it required it. In this case, that is not necessary. You don't have to just backlog a work record to make it a standard, because of the asset-backed capability now. It kind of alleviates needing to do that, where the
also
slider comes into play.
For the non-asset backed standards, so we have standard records that you can create in the system that is just a standard. There's no asset associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, for more ease of use. And what it would just do is you would just manually enter the last action date and pass, fail. That's also why we have the attachments. Maybe we just want to update the certificates in the attachment script. Every time it comes due to its expiration date, new certificate, update the expiration date. And so also the measurement class here, that ties back into what Matt was saying. I can only use standards where my measurement class matches the the measurement class of the unit under test or the instrument being calibrated. So again, that way you're not using pressure standards with a weight standard or weight equipment.
Yeah. And Nick, just a quick question for you. This asset backed, can that be a system record now?
I believe we still have it limited to just equipment, but right. I mean, theoretically with custom configuration, you can tell it to be whatever.
Just curious. It came to my mind. Anyways, so at a quick glance, that's a standard record with being asset backed.
One last one.
Asset backed. Oh, sorry, Nick.
I was going to talk about, just to touch on expiration real quick. So this can also represent an expiration standard, so some sort of pH solution, and that's what the lot number in the bottom left-hand corner is supposed to represent. So there's some sort of traceability, so if you want to track a pH solution. And then in that case, the expiration date is truly an expiration date. Once this is past its expiration date, I can no longer use this in certain calibrations.
There was a question yesterday that I can't remember who asked it, but they said, well, how do I get my one-time use standards?
Single use, Keith and I talked about that. Yeah. We're bouncing off ideas. One way that might be possible is if we add a checkbox or some other field to indicate it's single use. And as soon as it's referenced in a work history, automation makes it retired. But we'd have to look and see where all we can reach and what information we can pull into there to make that possible.
Yeah.
So single use, we're aware of that. We've already started having side discussions about single use.
There you go. Okay, so moving on to just the other area, kind of last area that I want to touch upon, which is on the measurement options. So where do you now put those, or where would you put those in R4? So I'm going to drive to the particular asset that this standard is backed on. And so just quickly navigate to there. So now I'm brought to the actual piece of equipment, the instrument that was from the standard record. And no different than your equipment records now, you can go, and where I'm going to go is in the upper left to the menu here and have these selections available to me, is drive to the measurement options area. This is similar to where you would go to enter a couple things. One, the accuracy ratio and your ranges. So those were two different places within R3. What we've done is we consolidated those into just the measurement options area. So now you can have kind of a one-stop shop to enter those particular criteria for your instrumentation with some graphics, if I might add. So your accuracy ratio of, or your accuracy of the piece of instrument, or the instrument, your required ratio for when this gets calibrated, it needs to be, 4 times, that needs to be 4 times as accurate as this. The units, the ranges, the min and max ranges of this particular instrument. There's some form of guard banding here that you can evaluate. It doesn't get into the points, but you could actually see from a graphical depiction here of your calibration tolerance versus process tolerance. If you're using those, maybe you're not, maybe you're just using the calibration tolerance. But you get to see some visual of those values, which may be more meaningful to you. Okay. Nick, was there anything else that you wanted to add here?
The bullseye in the top right corner, that is indicative of the required ratio. If you think of the accuracy of what's being used to calibrate it as the light blue and its accuracy, the dark blue, kind of shows your ratio of how much more accurate it's supposed to be. Granted, this is, still initial release, and I've talked with Dan. I don't know if Dan's on the presentation. He's put in a ton of work, and they have many more ideas on how to continue fleshing this out. And I just want to say, without your feedback, we wouldn't have this. So the more calibration information you send us, we can add that in here. Dan actually said something. As a note regarding MD tests, the way the eccentricity tests work in R4, that the first point of the test is meant to be the center point that all of the points will be measured against, right? So the first reading you take, if it's 499.9, that's what the remaining will be. When the instrument value of the first point is entered, it will automatically enter the value as the standard for the rest of the points. So I'll cascade down to the rest of the set points. This allows the tech to fill in the instrument readings for each point on the diagram, and the software will compare the rest of the points in that test against the first point test reading. This has been changed from last year's R4 demo based on customer feedback. Yeah, so the repeatability test is a test of fidelity. What was my first reading? 499. How many times am I going to repeat the 499 value? We're comparing it to that first initial reading.
Great. One more thing to add on the measurement options is you can use these values for when you're creating your measurement data templates. You can say use operating range, and it'll carry those over for if you're capturing it here, you can carry it over to the measurement data.
Also, thank you for your input, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt said exactly the range here. Same thing within R3. If we said use operating range in our measurement data template, it'll pull that data we have in the asset.
Yeah. So Drexel or Nick, you could probably see the questions. I don't, but maybe we can open it up to questions now.
Matt, I'm on here also.
Okay. Thanks, Van.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the chat now. I know a lot of some of the Blue Mountain people have been kind of responding to everybody also throughout here. So I'm just going to try to see if there are any that we didn't answer yet. And if you did write your question and you notice that we didn't answer, and it seems to have been a while ago, feel free to retype it and we can ask it aloud. Or if you'd like, you can just unmute yourself and ask aloud as well.
Anything? Anybody?
I think they've all been answered.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I might wait till the breakout session. I
Yeah.
don't want to take up any more time.
Okay.
Yeah, so again, like I said, and like what Andy said too, they rebuilt a lot of this application from the ground up so that it can be flexible and so that we can try and capture the formulas and the way you want to input your data. The thing is, though, is we need your input of how you want to capture your data. I think it was just last week I sent Dan 4 different calibration shirts that a customer was using. It's like, here's some more examples of things we want to maybe try to incorporate in the future. So if you're okay with sharing that data with us, we'd love to have it.
Yeah, I briefly spoke with Keith. We briefly touched on pipettes, and that was like, okay, that's another breakout. We'll wait on that one too. But pipettes it would incorporate very similar. You'll have definitely your repeatability, your standard deviations, what have you. But we can wait. It can get very, very in depth.
That's true, Peter. It's pipettes are a different monster altogether, as you well know, and many of you know. A lot of it's outsourced even because of it. But it's something that we could potentially do in the future, depending on priorities and things.
And I'd just like to add too, I think I responded in the chat window as well, but to reiterate, the test types that you see here on the left pane will apply to a lot of scenarios, but we already actually have some others in mind that we can add to this that we're working on. So one of the benefits of the new architecture of the MDT is we can extend this. We can literally create a new test type out there that might be calculating different aggregate statistics, specifically around the pipette. We know the Z factor is part of that. How do we incorporate that into one of these? The repeatability test right now actually calculates pretty much almost all of the statistics that we see there, except for the Z factor. So that's a particular one that we're looking at extending and adding to. So as Matt said, we are always listening and looking for your input on what we need to add. And this is a particular area that's very nuanced and specific to metrology and calibration. We've always considered ourselves a best-in-class calibration solution, and we intend to keep it that way, and with your help.
I had a quick question. It's kind of off topic, but so I work for Kite, and I'm working at our new site, which we're trying to set up everything at. So we're developing all of our MDTs or job plans and things like that. We're currently on R3, and there's talk about going to R4. Now, what I was wondering is what kind of migration does that involve? And am I going to have to redo all the work I'm doing right now?
So the short answer is no, you won't have to redo that work. And the rest of it is, if you could hold that question, my particular area at the end of the demos, I'll actually cover that question specifically, which is certainly on all of the minds of any R3 customers or even R2 that are using MDTs today.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. So with those, I think all the questions have been answered in our chat. And so it's about 3:10 now. So we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break. And then following the break, we're going to have a presentation on charting and reports. And then Keith will go into what comes next with Blue Mountain RAM R4. So if anybody wants to stay on, you can either stay on and chat with other customers or some Blue Mountain people. But in the meantime, we're going to take a 10-minute break. So if you'd like to turn your camera off, and then we'll reconvene at 3:20.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.